I imagine that not doing anything would be where you can begin to find meaning or answers to whatever questions plague you at night when you want to sleep, or during your random routine work days. And for people, hello and welcome to this week's read along series. We're still reading Revolutionary Road. So yeah, I'm just trying to be comfy, just chill reading session and all. And we're going to read chapter 7. So last week's chapter here ended with April reconciling with Franquilla, and this was after Franquilla came back from having an affair with his very young secretary at the office. So I wonder what inspired April to be this excited and all. I'm going to find out in this chapter. So chapter 7. Forgive you for what, April? They were standing alone on the living room carpet, and she took a tentative step toward him. Oh, for everything, she said, for everything. The way I was all weekend, the way I've been ever since I got mixed up in that awful play. Oh, I've got so much to tell you, and I've got the most wonderful plan, Frank. Listen. But it wasn't easy to listen to anything over the outraged silence in his head. He felt like a monster. He had wolfed his dinner like a starving man and topped it up with 7 clawing forkfuls of chocolate cake. He had repeatedly exclaimed over the unwrapping of his birthday gifts. The very word he had used to describe what Maureen Group had been to him. Swell, swell. He had heard his children's bedtime prayers and tiptoed from their room. Now he was allowing his wife to ask forgiveness, and at the same time, with a cold eye, he was discovering that she wasn't really very much to look at. She was too old and too tall and too intense. He wanted to rush outdoors and make some dramatic atonement, smash his fist against a tree, or run for miles, leaping stone walls until he fell exhausted in a morass of mud and brambles. Instead, he shut his eyes and reached out and drew her close against him, crushing her cocktail apron in a desperate embrace, letting all his torment dissolve in pressing and stroking the inward curve of her back, while he urged his groaning, muttering mouth into her throat. "Oh, my lovely," he said. "Oh, my lovely girl." "No, wait. Listen. Do you know what I did all day? I missed you. And Frank, I've thought of the most wonderful. No, wait. I mean, I love you and everything, but listen a minute. The only way to stop her talking and get her out of sight was to kiss her mouth. Then the floor began to tilt at dangerous angles, and they might have fallen into the coffee table if they hadn't taken 3 tottering steps and gone over instead into the voluptuous safety of the sofa. "Darling," she whispered, fighting for breath, "I do love you terribly, but don't you think we ought to—" "Oh, no, don't stop. Don't stop." "Ought to what?" "Ought to sort of try and get into the bedroom first. But not if it makes you cross. We'll stay here if you like. I love you." "No, you're right. We will." He forced himself up, dragging her with him. "I better take a shower first, too." "Oh, no, don't. Please don't take a shower. I won't let you." "I've got to, April." "Why?" "Just because. I've got to." It took all of his will to move one heavy swing step at a time. "I think you're terribly mean," she was saying, clinging to his arm. "Terribly, terribly mean." "Frank, did you like the present? Was the tie alright?" "I went to about 14 different places and none of them had any decent ties." "It's a swell tie. It's the nicest tie I've ever had." Under the stiff pelting of hot water, in which Maureen Group had become an adhesive second skin that only the most desperate scrubbing would shed, he decided he would have to tell her. He would soberly take hold of both her hands and say, "Listen, April, this afternoon He turned off all the hot water and turned up the cold, a thing he hadn't done in years. The shock of it sent him dancing and gasping, but he made himself stay under it until he had counted to 30 the way he used to do in the army, and he came out feeling like $1 million. Tell her? Why? Of course he wasn't going to tell her. What the hell would be the point of that? Oh, you look so clean, she said, whirling from the closet in her best white nightgown. You look so clean and peaceful. Come sit beside me and let's talk a minute first, alright? Look what I've got. She had set a bottle of brandy and two glasses on the night table, but it was a long time before he allowed her to pour it or to say anything else. When she did pull away from him once, it was only to remove the constriction of lace from her shoulders and let it fall away from her breast, whose nipples were hardening and rising even before he covered them with his hands. For the second time that day, he discovered that the act of love could leave him speechless, and he hoped she would be willing to let the talking wait for tomorrow. He knew that whatever she had to say would be said without all theatrical emphasis, and he didn't feel equipped to deal with it just now. All he wanted was to lie here smiling in the dark, confused and guilty and happy, and submit to the gathering weight of sleep. Darling, her voice sounded very far away. Darling, you're not going to sleep, are you? Because I do have so much to say, and we're letting the brandy go to waste, and I haven't even had a chance to tell you about my plan. After a minute, he found it easy to stay awake, if only for the pleasure of sitting with her under the double cloak of a blanket, sipping brandy in the moonlight and hearing the rise and fall of her voice. Play acting or not, her voice in moods of love had always been a pretty sound. At last, with some reluctance, he began to pay attention to what she was saying. Her plan, the idea born of her sorrow and her missing him all day and her loving him, was an elaborate new program for going to Europe for good in the fall. Did he realize how much money they had with their savings, with the proceeds from the sale of the house and car? And with what they could save between now and September, they would have enough to live comfortably for 6 months. And it won't take anything like 6 months before we are established and self-supporting again for as long as we like. That's the best part. He cleared his throat. Look, baby, in the first place, what kind of a job could I possibly... No kind of a job. Oh, I know you could get a job anywhere in the world if you had to, but that's not the point. The point is you won't be getting any kind of a job because I will. Don't laugh. Listen a minute. Have you any idea how much they pay for secretarial work in all these government agencies overseas? NATO and the ECA and those places. And do you realize how low the cost of living is compared to here? She had it all figured out. She had read an article in a magazine. Her skills at typing and shorthand would bring them enough to live on, and more. Enough for a part-time servant to take care of the children while she worked. It was, she insisted, such a marvelously simple plan that she was amazed at having never thought of it before. But she had to keep interrupting herself with mounting impatience to tell him not to laugh. This laughter of his was not quite genuine, nor was the way he kept squeezing her shoulder as if to dismiss the whole thing as an endearing whimsy. He was trying to conceal from her, if not from himself, that the plan had instantly frightened him. I'm serious about this, Frank, she said. Do you think I'm kidding or something? No, I know. I just have a couple of questions, though. For one thing, what exactly am I supposed to be doing while you're out earning all this dough? She drew back and tried to examine his face in the dim light, as if she couldn't believe he had failed to understand. Don't you see? Don't you see that's the whole idea? You'll be doing what you should have been allowed to do 7 years ago. You'll be finding yourself. You'll be reading and studying and taking long walks and thinking. You'll have time. For the first time in your life, you have time to find out what it is you want to do. And when you find it, you have the time and the freedom to start doing it. And that, he knew as he chuckled and shook his head, was what he had been afraid she would say. He had a quick, disquieting vision of her coming home from a day at the office, wearing a Parisian tailored suit, briskly pulling off her gloves, coming home and finding him hunched in an egg-stained bathroom and on an unmade bed, picking his nose. Look, he began. He let his hand slide off her shoulder and work its way up under her arm to fondle the shape and light weight of her breast. In the first place, all this is very sweet and very, it's not sweet. She pronounced the word as if it were the quintessence of everything she despised. She caught at his hand and threw it down as if it were despicable too. For God's sake, Frank, I'm not being sweet. I'm not making any big altruistic sacrifice. Can't you see that? Okay, okay, it's not sweet. Don't get so. Whatever it is, though, I think you have to agree it isn't very realistic. That's all I meant. In order to agree with that, I would have to have a very strange and very low opinion of reality. Because you see, I happen to think that this is unrealistic. I think it's unrealistic for a man with a fine mind to go on working like a dog year after year at a job he can't stand, coming home to a house he can't stand, in a place he can't stand either, to a wife who's equally unable to stand the same things, living among a bunch of frightened little. My God, Frank, I don't have to tell you what's wrong with this environment. I'm practically quoting you. Just last night when the Campbells were here, remember what you said about the whole idea of suburbia being to keep reality at bay? You said everybody wanted to bring up their children in a bath of sentimentality. You said, I know what I said. I didn't think you were listening though. You looked sort of bored. I was bored. That's part of what I'm trying to say. I don't think I've ever been more bored and depressed and fed up in my life than I was last night. All that business about Helen giving son on top of everything else, and the way we all grabbed at it like dogs after meat. I remember looking at you and thinking, God, if only he would stop talking. Because everything you said was based on this great premise of ours that we are somehow very special and superior to the whole thing. And I wanted to say, but we are not. Look at us. We are just like the people you are talking about. We are the people you are talking about. I sort of had, I don't know, contempt for you because you couldn't see the terrific fallacy of the thing. And then this morning when you left, when you were backing the car around down at the turn, I saw you look back up at the house as if it was going to bite you. You looked so miserable, I started to cry. And then I started feeling lonely as hell, and I thought, well, how did everything get so awful then? If it's not his fault, whose fault is it? How did we ever get into this strange little dream world of the Donaldsons and the Kramers and the Wingates? Oh yes, and the Campbells too, because another thing I figured out today is that both those Campbells are a big, big, colossal waste of time. And it suddenly began to dawn on me, honestly Frank, it was like a revelation or something. I was standing there in the kitchen and it suddenly began to dawn on me that it's my fault. It's always been my fault. And I can tell you when it began. I can tell you the exact moment in time when it began. Don't interrupt me. But he knew better than to interrupt her now. She must have spent the morning in an agony of thought, pacing up and down the rooms of a dead silent, dead clean house, and twisting her fingers at her waist until they ached. She must have spent the afternoon in a frenzy of action at the shopping center, lurching her car imperiously through mazes of no left turn signs and angry traffic cops, racing in and out of stores to buy the birthday gift and the roast of beef and the cake and the cocktail apron. A whole day had been a heroic build-up for this moment of self-abasement, and now it was here, and she was damned if she would stand for any interference. It was way back on Bethlehem Street, she said. It was when I first got pregnant with Jennifer, and I told you I was going to, abort her. I mean, up until that moment, you didn't want a baby any more than I did. Why should you have? But when I went out and bought that rubber syringe, I put the whole burden of the thing on you. It was like saying, all right then, if you want this baby, it's going to be all your responsibility. You're going to have to turn yourself inside out to provide for us. You have to give up any idea of being anything in the world but a father. Oh Frank, if only you had given me what I deserve. If only you had called me a bitch and turned your back on me. You could have called my bluff in a minute. I'd probably never have gone through with the thing. I probably wouldn't have had the courage for one thing, but you didn't. You were too good and young and scared. You played right along with it, and that's how this whole thing started. That's how we both got committed to this enormous delusion, because that's what it is, an enormous obscene delusion. This idea that people have to resign from real life and settle down when they have families. It's the great sentimental lie of the suburbs, and I've been making you subscribe to it all this time. I've been making you live by it, my God. I've even gone as far as to walk up this completely corny soap opera picture of myself. And I guess this is what really brought it home to me. This picture of myself as the girl who could have been the actress. As if she hadn't gotten married. The actress, if she hadn't gotten married too young. And I mean, you know perfectly well I was never any kind of an actress. I never really wanted to be. You know, I only went to the academy to get away from home. And I know it too. I've always known it. And here for 3 months, I've been walking around with this noble, bittersweet expression on my face. I mean, how self deluded can you get? Do you see how neurotic all of this is? I wanted to have it both ways. It wasn't enough that spoiled your life. I wanted to bring the whole monstrous thing full circle and make it seem that you had spoiled mine. So I could end up being the victim. Isn't that awful? But it's true. It's true. And as it's true, she thumped a tight little fist on her naked knee. Now, do you see what you have to forgive me for? And why we have to get out of here and over to Europe as fast as we possibly can? It isn't a case of my being sweet or generous or anything else. I'm not doing you any favors. All I'm giving you is what you've always been entitled to. And I'm only sorry it has to come so late. Alright. Can I talk now? Yes, you do understand though, don't you? And could I have a little more of the brandy? Just a splash. That's fine. Thanks. When she sipped at it, she threw back her hair, allowing the blanket to slide from her shoulders and drew a little away from him in order to sit back against the wall, tucking her legs up beneath her. She looked wholly relaxed and confident, ready to listen, happy in the knowledge that she had stated her case. The blue-white luminescence of her body was a powerful force. He knew he wouldn't be able to think straight if he looked at her, so he willed himself to look at the moonlit floor between his feet. And it took longer than necessary over the lighting of his cigarette, stalling for time. He would have to get his bearings. When she came home to the Paris apartment, her spike-heeled pumps would click decisively on the tile floor, and her hair would be pulled back into a neat bun. Her face would be drawn with fatigue so that the little vertical line between her eyes would show even when she smiled. On the other hand, in the first place, he said at last, I think you are being much too hard on yourself. Nothing is ever that black and white. You didn't force me to take the job at Knox. Besides, look at it this way. You say you've always known you weren't really an actress and therefore it's not too legitimate for you to go around feeling cheated. Well, let's face it, isn't it just possible the same thing applies to me? I mean, whoever said I was supposed to be a big deal? I don't know what you mean, she said calmly. I think it might be rather tiresome if you were a big deal, but if you mean whoever said you were exceptional, if you mean whoever said you had a first-rate original mind, well, my God, Frank, the answer is everybody. When I first met you, you were, oh hell, I was a little wise guy with a big mouth. I was showing off a lot of erudition I didn't have. You were not. How can you talk that way, Frank? Has it gotten so bad that you've lost all belief in yourself? Well, no, he had to admit it. He had to admit it hadn't gotten quite that bad. Besides, he was afraid he could detect a note of honest doubt in her voice, a faint suggestion that it might be possible to persuade her he had been a little wise guy after all, and this was distressing. Okay, he considered. Okay, let's say I was a promising kid. The point is, there were plenty of promising kids at Columbia. That doesn't necessarily mean there weren't plenty like you, she said, sounding reassured. I'll never forget what's his name, the one you always admired so much, the one who had been the fighter pilot and had all the girls. Bill Croft. I'll never forget the way he used to talk about you. He said to me once, if I had half that guy's brains, I'll quit worrying. And he meant it. Everybody knew there was nothing in the world you couldn't do or be if you only had a chance to find yourself. Anyway, all that beside the point, you wouldn't have to be the least bit exceptional, and this will still be a thing that has to be done. Don't you see that? Will you let me finish? in the first place. But instead of allowing his voice to run on, he felt a need to be quiet for a minute. He took a deep drink of brandy, letting it burn the roof of his mouth and send out waves of warmth across his shoulders and down his spine as he solemnly stared at the floor. Had Bill Croft really said that? Everything you say might make a certain amount of sense, he began again. And one of the ways he could tell he was losing the argument was that his voice had taken on a resonance that made it every bit as theatrical as hers. It was the voice of a hero, a voice befitting the kind of person Bill Crofts could admire. Might make a certain amount of sense if I had some definite measurable talent. If I were an artist, say, or a writer, or a, oh, Frank, can you really think artists and writers are the only people entitled to lives of their own? Listen, I don't care if it takes you 5 years of doing nothing at all. I don't care if you decide after 5 years that what you really want is to be a bricklayer or a mechanic or a merchant seaman. Don't you see what I'm saying? It's got nothing to do with definite, measurable talent. It's your very essence that's being stifled here. It's what you are that's being denied and denied and denied in this kind of life. And what's that? For the first time, he allowed himself to look at her. Not only to look, but to put down his glass and take hold of her leg, and she covered and pressed his hand with both of her own. Oh, don't you know? She brought his hand gently up to her hip, around to the flat of her abdomen, where she pressed it close again. Don't you know? You are the most valuable and wonderful thing in the world. You are a man. And of all the capitulations in his life, this was the one that seemed most like a victory. Never before had elation welled more powerfully inside him. Never had beauty grown more purely out of truth. Never in taking his wife had he triumphed more completely over time and space. The past could dissolve at his will, and so could the future. So could the walls of this house, and the whole imprisoning wasteland beyond it, towns and trees. He had taken command of the universe because he was a man, and because the marvelous creature who opened and moved for him, tender and strong, was a woman. At the first bright hesitant calls of awakening birds, when the mass trees were turning from grey to olive green in a rising mist, she gently touched his lips with her fingertips. Darling, we really are going to do it, aren't we? I mean, it hasn't just been a lot of talk or anything, has it? He was on his back, taking pleasure in the slow rise and fall of his own chest, which felt broad and deep and muscled enough to feel the modeling of a medieval breastplate. Was there anything he couldn't do? Was there any voyage he couldn't undertake, and any prize in life he couldn't promise her? No, he said, because I mean, I'd like to get started on it right away. Tomorrow, writing letters and whatnot, and seeing about the passports. And I think we ought to tell Nifa and Mike about it right away too, don't you? They'll need a little time to get used to it, and besides, I want them to know before anybody else, don't you? Yes, but I mean, I don't want to tell them unless you're absolutely sure. I'm absolutely sure. That's wonderful. Oh, darling, look at the time, and it's practically light outside. You'll be dead tired. No, I won't. I can sleep on the train. I can sleep at the office. It's all right. All right. I love you. And they fell asleep like children. Oh, God. Wow. Oh, my God. And then the book shows me what part two. Oh, you guys, like, even I got swept up in this narration. Like, how to say this? There are so many things, that, like, the reason why I got swept up in this narration is because, like, I took what April was like saying, the whole, how do you call it, in manifesto, that she was using to prove her point, in a way that would convince Frank to uproot everything with her and go to and move to Europe. You get like I took it so personal because I don't know, like I don't know how old is this book? When was this book published? I don't know. It was probably the year is not here. Mm, okay, I think it was like okay. It says here that Revolutionary Road was nominated for the National Book Award in 1961. 1960 was when Nigeria gained independence. Yeah. So anyway, my point is in this moment I was transported from the world of the Wheelers, and what April was saying was so poignant in the sense that if you read the bio of my channel, it goes welcome to nothing, that nothing happens here, so everything is a possibility. Yeah. So I don't know what she was saying, that the reason for her move, her motivation to move to Paris, to Europe, would be to I don't know, allow Frank space to really discover what he wants from life, because it's so obvious that he is being sucked dry from by the monotony of suburbia, and it's like okay, fine, he's being sucked dry. And like removing it from like her I don't know, praise or encouragement to Frank, it just feels very encouraging to me, because like this feels so universal. Growing up in a country like Nigeria where survival is everything, where like from the moment you are born, your life is being calculated for you, yeah, and any performance in school is used to grade, what your future would look like, you know and then coming out of the school system and like facing the real world and realizing that school is not a determiner of anything, no matter how good you were or bad. It does not reflect on how your life goes. And when you come out of the school system, or when I came out of the school system, I had to understand and kind of pick my life, which I'm still doing, from pieces. I'm in this place of nothingness where nothing happened, where there is just nothing, because I don't have a clear plan. I don't really have anything in my mind like that I can say, oh, this is what I want to do in my life. Yeah. But after all the initial stress and triggering feelings and horrors of despair, that I had to process, yeah, and walk my way through, which still comes up at certain days, certain moments, but like walking through all of that and finding relative stability, relative content where I am, where I am being nowhere. Finding content in being nowhere, and just like living life for life's sake, just existing in the moments that I'm alive. It just feels so wonderful that an author that wrote this book several years ago, how old is Nigeria? Who cares? That wrote this book several years ago, um elucidated it so perfectly. Like I feel like this is something I want to print out. This whole thing that April went on, like this whole spiel she went on, I want to print it out and kind of hang it all over my walls, and kind of like put it as my opening statement in my CV or something. Yeah. Like kind of like there's nothing going on here, and I'm fine with that. I'm fine with giving myself the space, to live, and to just be whatever I am, but like the thing about the fun part about giving people space is that, like, the way the world works, since everything is all consumerism and capitalism, and doing things for making money or doing things to survive, people start to get lost in the idea that, oh, this thing I'm doing, is my identity. And because it is your identity, you derive meaning from it, even when it is sucking your soul. I'm not saying this nothingness don't doesn't suck my soul, yeah, but like it is not, I don't know, have I missed my point? It is not an identity, yeah. Like having a stable job, getting a making a career, um making money, being paid a salary, or making money off of your small business, is all good and well, but then you have to still consider this aspect of living for life's sake, not living for the sake of the next paycheck. People say things like, oh, when I have my money, when I make it, like Nigerians would say, I would do this with my life, I would do that. It's like, oh, those things you're going to do, what is the guarantee that you're going to find any sort of fulfillment in those things? Yeah, there's no guarantee in anything actually. Anyway, let me not speak on what I don't know, because there are people that are working jobs and they have careers and they're very fine with their life. It doesn't bother them. But for the people that tend to be lost in this space where, despite them filling society boxes of success, society's ideas of success, having a wife, having kids, or having a partner, having kids, having a job, having your own place, your roof over your head, and eating, 3 square meals, all of those things, and you still feel like something is still needs to be done, or you still feel like there's a gaping hole, where you're supposed to feel fulfillment at achieving all of that. I think that this whole spiel of April is for you, like, I don't know, like something to just self-reflect on. There's no real solution, there's nothing I've discovered to be like, oh, if you are going through such a thing, this is what you have to do, because there's nothing you can do. Okay, yeah, you are doing the most already and it's still not enough. So I imagine that not doing anything would be where you can begin to find meaning or answers to whatever questions plague you at night when you want to sleep, or during your random routine work days. And for the people too that are not doing anything and feeling left behind, like this, like, why? That does not make any sense. Yeah. There's no behind and there's no front. Okay, it's all just made up boxes that society put in us through socialization, to just try to be productive members of it. If we don't fill those boxes, we are somehow showing the failure of society. And society is a system that loves to perpetuate itself at the cost of anything. So, like, your humanity, your belief in yourself, your real self, your being, who you are on the inside, society will sacrifice it on the altar of being able to perpetuate itself. I don't know. And it's kind of like what April is implying, what she can see from Frank's own life, going on. Like, she's so self-aware, and although Frank is deserving of this spiel, he's deserving of it, but in another sense, Frank is not somebody that is self-aware. He's caught up in his own hubris, and that is why she's able to pull on his biggest ego comfort, the idea of being a man. Like, when she says it that, oh, Frank, this is this. She felt for convinces him using one of the people, the men he admired, people he considers a real man, and she said that man, praised him to her, that kind of thing. And he was like, already, his head was already blown up. Then when she now said, because you're a man, oh God, his head scattered, splintered into several pieces. There was no fucking way he was going to reject the idea of moving to Europe, because, like, April, he has always seen April as something to always feed his ego, and she constantly refused to do that when, like, he was not reciprocating. Like, okay, if I feed your ego, why can't you at least make me feel like I'm your partner in that sense? But he has never given her that validation in his head, in his thoughts, and in his actions. Okay, so I feel like she just gathered up her arsenal of all the ways she knew her husband, and she played him into, like, where she wanted him to be. But to me, I kind of feel like, I really believe April was being sincere and genuine. I feel she sees right. I don't think Frank can make a clear cut appraisal of his wife, see her weaknesses, see her strength, uplift her in a way that makes her feel like she's, you know, top of the world, the way she just did in how many minutes with him, or for him during the play. He could not even say one single word, like just to say something to make her spirit go up. You get? But look at her saying, oh, he deserves everything just because he's a man. And I get the whole sexist, undertones of sexist overtones of that. You get? But that's what we're trying to see. That's what we know. That's what Frank is. Frank is sexist. He's just a male whatever. Like, this is so sucked into this idea of patriarchy, and he believes in the patriarchy. He worships the patriarchy, and because he worships at the altar of patriarchy, he expects the gods of patriarchy, the men of patriarchy, to reward him somewhat, in the form of his wife being like a worshipper of his, or stroking his ego constantly and consistently. Like, he literally just cheated on her, just in the afternoon. You get? And he's coming home, and instead of being racked, by the idea that okay, something is wrong with him, and he has to be self-aware that this cheating on his wife is something that he needs to face up, even in his mental state. He left Maureen feeling like a man, yeah. Now he came home and his wife is saying you're a man also. That's like two firing shots in his heart. Like, there's nothing he would not have done in that moment. But like, getting all this praise just based off of being a man, you get? Like, you can tell the type of person Frank is, and what the lens with which he views life. Like, I'm rambling a lot here, but I don't care. I really love this narration. It was fun. It was like sweet. It was like, I don't know. It's just shows you how much depth April has as a character. For her to call him out, in that moment where they decided to be married and live together because of the pregnancy that she was just too cowardly to abort, and she placed it in his hands to make the decision for both of them. And him making that decision was kind of a cop out. I don't know. To me, it felt like a cop out. But she saw it as him being naive, him falling for her bluffs and all of that. And it's like, bro, it's not only you that made this baby, it's two people that made the baby. Two people are mutually responsible in equal parts for this child. Okay, so whatever decision you might have made and decisions he made, he's responsible for that. It's not you to make. It's not what you did that made him be who he is. Yeah. And you see that she kept on blaming herself for, like, that was why she faulted herself for his emptiness, his lack of sense of self-fulfillment. Yeah, his absolute dread, existential dread, that he was facing, even when he was having that tirade about the givings and their mentally ill son, and she could still see through his rubbish. Yeah. And she called it out. She's self-aware enough to call it out without feeling less of it. Like, she was just like, hey, like, you were basically saying rubbish, but it's not anybody's fault. You had to say it because, like, I don't know, she was just being very clear and coherent and articulate and very level-headed about her. She's very self-aware. But Frank is not self-aware. After that whole tirade, he could have just laughed at himself, but he didn't laugh at himself because he takes himself way too seriously. He sees himself as this scholar, as what most Nigerians will say things. So anyway, that was today's reading video. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye. Thank you for being here.